Isolde produced an identification card from her purse and placed it in his hand. The lamination was yellowed around the edges. Officer Rustin turned the card over, frowning. "This is expired." "The appointment letter said it would be acceptable," Isolde replied, her voice soft but clear. She reached into her bag and produced an official-looking letter with a government seal. Rustin barely glanced at it before handing it back. "Purpose of your visit today?" "I have an appointment," Isolde answered simply. "An appointment for what?" Officer Rustin pressed, his voice rising just enough to draw attention from nearby travelers. Isolde hesitated. "It is personal." Her vagueness only heightened his suspicion. As other travelers, younger, louder, more fashionably dressed, were waved through with cursory checks, Officer Rustin's focus on Isolde intensified. He called over his colleague, a stockier man with salt and pepper hair, and a nameplate reading, "Loritz." "Officer Loritz, can you assist with a secondary screening?" Loritz approached, eyeing Isolde with the same unearned suspicion. "Step aside, ma'am." Isolde complied immediately, her posture shifting subtly into what almost resembled a position of attention. When she responded with an automatic, "Yes, sir," Officer Rustin's eyebrows raised slightly. "That bag," he pointed to her worn duffel, separate from the small rolling suitcase she carried. "Open it." "May I request a private screening?" Isolde asked quietly. Officer Rustin exchanged glances with Loritz. "No. Open it here." Rain still dripped from Isolde's coat as she stood before them, dignity intact but patience wearing thin. The checkpoint's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across her face as a small crowd of onlookers began to gather, sensing the brewing confrontation. "Is there a problem?" Isolde asked, her voice betraying nothing. "That depends on what you have in the bag," Rustin replied. A group of young office workers had stopped to watch, their morning coffee forgotten in their hands. One woman frowned at the scrutiny being given to the older woman, but said nothing. The rain continued to drum against the windows, providing a soundtrack to the tension. Isolde set the duffel on the table and unzipped it partway. "I would prefer privacy," she repeated. "And I would prefer compliance," Officer Rustin said, his voice harder now. "We can do this here, or we can take you to a room where the questions get a lot more thorough. Your choice." Something flickered in Isolde's eyes. Not fear, but a calculation, an assessment. It was the look of someone who had made difficult decisions before. "Very well," she said at last, stepping back. Officer Rustin snapped on a pair of latex gloves with theatrical flair. The snap echoed through the checkpoint, drawing even more attention. "Since you are being difficult, we will do this ourselves." The crowd grew, phones appearing to record the spectacle. Isolde's expression remained neutral, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something, not fear, but resignation. She had been here before, in different ways, different places. "What is so important in this bag that you need privacy?" Loritz asked, already unzipping the main compartment. They began removing her possessions one by one, displaying them on the cold metal table. A prescription bottle of pills, a carefully wrapped framed photograph that they did not unwrap, a dog-eared copy of Tennyson's poems, each item extracted with less care than the last. A young office worker whispered to his colleague, "This feels wrong." His friend nodded but kept watching, unable to look away from the quiet humiliation unfolding before them. "What is this?" Rustin held up a small, unusual key, ornate and clearly old. "It opens something that should have stayed closed," Isolde replied, her voice steady but distant. The officers laughed. "Very mysterious," Rustin mocked. "Old spy movie fan, are we?" As they continued their search, more personal items emerged, things that should remain private. A handwritten letter, a medical document with test results clearly visible, each displayed for all to see under the harsh lights. "Dresdenville Operation, 1976, Loritz read from a small notebook he had found, mangling the pronunciation. "What is that? Your bridge club?" Isolde remained silent, eyes fixed forward, as if she had weathered worse storms than this public humiliation. "These old people and their secrets," Rustin said loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "always think they are more important than they are." Isolde's silence seemed to irritate him further. He dug deeper into the bag, pulling out a small box. "And what is this?" he asked, opening it without permission. Inside was a small metal pin, unmarked but clearly military in design. "A memento," Isolde answered simply. "Of what?" Rustin pressed. "Of people who are gone now." The officer rolled his eyes and tossed the box back onto the table, not bothering to close it. The pin slid out, clattering against the metal surface. Isolde's eyes followed it, the first real reaction she had shown. "Careful with that, please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, is it valuable?" Rustin asked with mock concern. "Maybe we should have it appraised." "Not in money," Isolde replied. The final compartment of the duffel remained. Rustin reached for the zipper with exaggerated slowness, playing to his audience. The crowd had grown to nearly 20 people now, all watching the drama unfold. "Let us see what other ancient treasures we have in here," he said, tugging the zipper. A woman in line stepped forward. "Excuse me, is this really necessary? You have already checked everything else." Rustin glared at her. "Security protocol, ma'am. Please step back." Isolde gave the woman a small nod of appreciation, but her face remained composed, almost resigned. Whatever was in that final compartment, she had already accepted its discovery. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows like distant artillery. For a moment, Isolde seemed to be listening to it rather than paying attention to the search. Her mind elsewhere, in another time, another place where rain had fallen just as heavily. "ID check on the subject," Loritz said into his radio, still suspicious of Isolde's outdated identification. While they waited for a response, Rustin continued his examination of her belongings, holding up a small address book. "Planning to visit friends while you are in town?" he asked. "Some of these addresses are overseas." "Most of those people are dead now," Isolde replied quietly. Something in her tone made even Rustin pause, but only for a moment. His radio crackled. "ID verification inconclusive," came the response. "System shows a Thorn, Isolde M, but the file is restricted. Possible government employee?" Rustin's eyes narrowed. "Government employee? What department?" "I am retired," Isolde said. "From what position?" Loritz asked. "That is classified," she replied, the words automatic, as if she had said them many times before. Rustin laughed. "Classified, right, and I am the president." The crowd had grown restless, some muttering about the treatment of the elderly woman. Others filmed more openly now, sensing a potential viral moment in the making. The security officers seemed to feed off the attention, their movements becoming more performative. "This is taking too long," a businessman complained from the back of the line. "Some of us have actual appointments." "Sir, please wait your turn," Loritz called back. "Security cannot be rushed." Through it all, Isolde remained still, watching her possessions being examined and dismissed. Only when Rustin picked up the framed photograph and began to unwrap it did she speak. "Please be careful with that," she said, her voice firmer now. "It is irreplaceable." "Everything is irreplaceable to someone," Rustin replied dismissively, but he did place it down with slightly more care. The photograph remained wrapped, but a corner had come loose. From where she stood, Isolde could see just a glimpse of the image, a group of people in uniform, standing before a helicopter. Her eyes lingered on it before returning to their forward gaze. "Nothing suspicious so far," Loritz admitted reluctantly. "Just one more compartment." "The most suspicious people hide things in plain sight," Rustin replied, clearly unwilling to admit the search had been unnecessary. He reached for the final zipper compartment of the duffel bag, the one Isolde had been most reluctant to have searched in public. As his hand closed around the zipper pull, a tall, elderly man in a formal military suit entered the atrium from a side door. He moved with purpose toward another checkpoint, accompanied by two younger officers in dress uniform. Isolde saw him, but gave no indication of recognition. Her eyes returned to Rustin's hand as he prepared to open the final compartment of her bag. "Last chance," Rustin said with a smirk. "Anything you want to tell us before we see what you are hiding?" "I am not hiding anything," Isolde replied calmly. "I simply value my privacy." "Privacy is a luxury in security situations," Loritz intoned, as if reciting from a manual. The zipper made a slow, deliberate sound as Rustin pulled it, exposing the contents of the final compartment to the fluorescent lights of the government building lobby. The crowd leaned forward unconsciously, curiosity overcoming their better instincts. "Well, Rustin said, reaching inside. "What do we have here?" Rustin pulled out a carefully folded piece of fabric from the final compartment. The material was thick, high quality, and deeply blue in color. As he shook it open carelessly, several people in the growing crowd gasped audibly. It was unmistakably a military uniform jacket, preserved with meticulous care until this moment. "Playing dress-up, are we?" Rustin asked with a smirk, turning the jacket to examine it. His smirk faltered slightly as he noticed the insignia and decorations. Even to his untrained eye, there was something unusual about them. Loritz stepped closer, his expression shifting from mockery to confusion. "These markings," he muttered. "I have never seen some of these before." The uniform bore patches and pins that seemed oddly mismatched to the casual observer. Some recognized military symbols alongside others that were completely foreign. But to anyone with military knowledge, the combination would have been both rare and significant. "Is this some kind of costume?" Rustin asked, his tone still dismissive but now tinged with uncertainty. "Halloween came early this year?" Isolde's eyes never left the uniform as it dangled from Rustin's careless grip. For the first time, emotion flickered across her features. Not anger, but a profound sadness mixed with something that might have been pride. "That is not a costume," she said quietly. "Then what is it?" Loritz pressed. "Because these insignia do not make sense together." "They would if you had the proper clearance," Isolde replied. Rustin snorted. "Right, secret agent grandma." He turned the jacket around, displaying it to the gathered crowd like an auctioneer showing off merchandise. "Look at this, folks. Apparently we have a retired spy in our midst." Some in the crowd laughed nervously, but others had grown silent, uncomfortable with the mockery of an elderly woman. A few had even lowered their phones, no longer finding entertainment in the spectacle. "There are medals here," a woman in the crowd said suddenly. "Those look real." Indeed, several medals were pinned to the uniform jacket, their metal catching the light. They were not the common decorations seen in parades or on Veterans Day. These were specialized, obscure, the kind awarded for operations the public never heard about. "Probably bought at a surplus store," Rustin dismissed her, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. He turned back to Isolde. "Where did you get this?" "It was issued to me," she answered simply. Loritz had been studying the jacket more carefully. "There is a name tag," he said, pointing to a faded patch on the breast. Rustin squinted at it. "Thorn," he read aloud. "I-M." He looked up at Isolde. "Isolde M. Thorn, so it is yours. Or you had it custom made." "Check the service number," Isolde suggested, her voice still calm, but with an undertone of steel now. "It should match my identification." Loritz looked from the jacket to the ID card they had taken earlier, comparing the numbers. His expression changed subtly. "They match." A man in the crowd, older than most of the others, stepped forward for a better look. "Those are not regular military decorations," he said. "That patch there, I have only ever seen it in photographs from classified operations in the 70s. Rustin glared at him. "Sir, please step back and allow us to do our job." The man raised his hands and retreated, but the damage was done. Doubt had been cast on the officer's assumption that Isolde was simply a confused elderly woman, or, worse, someone playing dress-up with military memorabilia. "How did you come by this uniform?" Loritz asked, his tone now slightly more respectful. "I earned it," Isolde said simply. Rustin was unwilling to concede so easily. "Women were not allowed in combat roles during that time period," he said triumphantly, as if catching her in a lie. "Officially," Isolde agreed. Something in the way she said the word made several people exchange glances. The implication hung in the air. What happened officially and what happened in reality could be very different things, especially in military operations. "So, what are you claiming? That you were some kind of secret female soldier?" Rustin's skepticism was clear, but his mockery had lost its edge. "I am not claiming anything," Isolde replied. "I am simply here for my appointment." The tall military officer who had entered earlier was now standing at the other checkpoint, showing his identification. He glanced over at the commotion, his attention caught by the uniform in Rustin's hands. Even at a distance, his posture straightened imperceptibly. Loritz had been scrolling through something on a tablet. "I am searching military records for an Isolde M. Thorn," he said. "Nothing is coming up in the public database." "You would not find me there," Isolde said. "Convenient," Rustin muttered. One of the medals slipped from the uniform and clattered to the floor. Isolde flinched visibly, the first sign of real distress she had shown. Before either officer could move, she stepped forward and picked it up herself, cradling it momentarily in her palm before holding it out. "This was awarded after Dresdenweil," she said softly. "3 of us received it. I am the only one still alive." Something in her tone silenced even Rustin temporarily. He took the medal and reattached it to the uniform with surprising care. "What was Dresdenweil?" Loritz asked, curiosity overcoming his official demeanor. "It was the operation name in your notebook," Isolde replied, "and that is all I am permitted to say, even now." The crowd had grown larger, and the atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as public humiliation was transforming into something else, a mystery unfolding in real time. Who was this elderly woman with the classified past? What operations had she been part of that remained secret decades later? "We need to verify this," Loritz said, more to his colleague than to Isolde. "If these are authentic military decorations, and if there is a legitimate reason they are not in the public record—" "She is making it up," Rustin interrupted, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Old people do this sometimes, create fantasies about their past." "My past required no embellishment," Isolde said quietly. "Often, quite the opposite." A young woman in the crowd had been typing frantically on her phone. "I just searched for Dresdenweil operation," she announced. "Nothing comes up except for a footnote in a declassified document about Cold War operations. It just says, see file D78, classified." All eyes turned to Isolde, who showed no reaction to this information. She had known there would be no records. That had been the point. The tall military officer had completed his check-in process and was now walking in their direction, his expression unreadable, but his focus entirely on the scene unfolding at the security checkpoint. "I would like my uniform back now," Isolde said firmly, "and my other belongings. I will be late for my appointment." "We cannot just take your word for this," Rustin insisted, though his earlier confidence had evaporated. "Anyone can claim to have been part of a secret military operation." "I am not claiming anything," Isolde repeated. "I simply wish to proceed to my appointment with my belongings." "What exactly is this appointment?" Loritz pressed. "If you would just tell us—" "That information is restricted," Isolde replied automatically. "Everything is restricted with you, is it not?" Rustin snapped, frustration replacing his earlier mockery. "Convenient way to avoid answering questions." "Not convenient," Isolde corrected him. "Necessary, and in accordance with the oath I took." The military officer was now close enough that details of his uniform were visible, the stars on his shoulders indicating his high rank, the rows of ribbons and medals on his chest speaking to a long and distinguished career. He moved with purpose directly toward their checkpoint. Rustin noticed him approaching and straightened unconsciously. "Sir, this area is—" "Is that Captain Thorne's uniform you are holding, officer?" the man interrupted, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command. The checkpoint fell silent. Even those not directly involved in the confrontation sensed the shift in power. Rustin looked from the uniform in his hands to the approaching officer, confusion evident on his face. We were just conducting a routine security check, sir," he stammered. The military officer stopped directly in front of them, his gaze moving from the uniform to Isolde. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he straightened his back and raised his hand in a perfect military salute. "Captain Thorne," he said formally, "it has been many years." Isolde returned the salute with practiced precision, her movements betraying years of muscle memory. "General Crane," she acknowledged, 40 years, I believe." The crowd murmured in surprise. Rustin and Loritz exchanged panicked glances, suddenly aware they might have made a serious error in judgment. "You know this woman, sir?" Loritz asked carefully. "Know her?" General Crane's eyebrows rose. "Captain Isolde Thorne was one of the finest officers I ever had the privilege of serving with, though I suspect that information has only recently become available to individuals with your clearance level." Rustin still held the uniform, now with considerably more care than before. "Sir, we had no way of knowing—" "Her file was only declassified last month," General Crane continued, addressing the officers but looking at Isolde. "After all these years, the operations her unit conducted can finally be acknowledged, which is why we are here today." General Crane turned to face the security officers fully, his posture commanding and his voice level but authoritative. "I would appreciate it if you would return Captain Thorne's belongings to her with the same care and respect with which they were packed." Officer Rustin's face had drained of all color. "Yes, sir. Of course, sir." He began carefully refolding the uniform jacket, his earlier mockery replaced with clumsy reverence. "We were just following protocol, sir." "Protocol includes dignity, officer," General Crane replied. "Something worth remembering." Loritz had already begun gathering Isolde's personal items, handling each with exaggerated care. The crowd watched in fascination as the power dynamic shifted completely. Phones were still recording, capturing the transformation from humiliation to vindication. "Captain Thorne is here to receive the Distinguished Service Cross," General Crane announced, loudly enough for those nearby to hear, an honor that could not be bestowed earlier due to the classified nature of her service. A murmur ran through the gathered onlookers. The Distinguished Service Cross was the second highest military decoration that could be awarded to a member of the United States Army, just below the Medal of Honor. It recognized extraordinary heroism in combat. "The President will be presenting the medal himself," General Crane continued, "along with recognition for the other surviving members of Captain Thorne's unit." Rustin handed the uniform jacket back to Isolde, now wrapped in respectful silence. She took it with a small nod, her fingers brushing over the fabric with familiarity. "I apologize for the misunderstanding, ma'am," he said, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Isolde regarded him for a long moment before speaking. "Respect is not earned by insignia," she said quietly. "It is earned by recognizing humanity in others." The simple words carried weight in the hushed atmosphere of the checkpoint. Several people in the crowd nodded in silent agreement. The young woman who had searched for information about the Dismantle operation was typing again, likely sharing the unfolding story on social media. "Your team's file was declassified just last month," General Crane said to Isolde, helping her gather her belongings. "After all these years, the nation can finally acknowledge what you did, what you all sacrificed." "Most of my team is not here to see it," Isolde replied softly. 5 survivors out of 17, General Crane confirmed. "All of you will be honored today." Loritz, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "Sir, if I may ask, what exactly did Captain Thorne's unit do? For historical context." General Crane looked to Isolde, who gave a slight nod of permission. Captain Thorne was part of Special Operations Group Delta, a mixed-gender unit that operated behind enemy lines during conflicts that, officially, the United States was never involved in. They gathered intelligence, extracted high-value targets, and sometimes, when necessary, conducted missions that altered the course of the Cold War. "Mixed gender?" Rustin repeated, confusion evident in his voice. "But women were not in combat roles back then." "Officially," General Crane said, echoing Isolde's earlier statement. "But Captain Thorne's linguistic abilities and specialized training made her invaluable in certain theaters of operation. The military has always made exceptions for exceptional people, regardless of what the public was told." The crowd had grown larger now, word spreading through the building about the decorated veteran being honored. Some people were pointing at Isolde with newfound respect, while others simply watched the scene unfold with curiosity. "We should proceed, Captain," General Crane said to Isolde. "The ceremony begins in 30 minutes, and the others are waiting to see you." Isolde nodded and picked up her duffel bag, now repacked with her belongings. As she prepared to leave, a young female security officer who had been watching the entire exchange stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I just wanted to say thank you for your service." Isolde studied the young woman for a moment before responding. "What is your name, officer?" "Adira Ellis, ma'am." "Officer Ellis, the greatest service often happens where no one is watching, with no expectation of recognition. Remember that." Isolde's words were soft, but carried clearly in the now quiet checkpoint area. General Crane escorted Isolde toward the elevators, the crowd parting respectfully to let them through. As they walked away, Rustin and Loritz stood in uncomfortable silence, both processing the magnitude of their error. "We really messed up," Loritz muttered. "How were we supposed to know?" Rustin replied defensively, though his voice lacked conviction. An older man in the crowd overheard them. Maybe that is the point, he said. We never know who someone really is just by looking at them. The observation hung in the air as General Crane and Isolde disappeared into an elevator, heading to the ceremony where her decades of silent service would finally be acknowledged. The ceremony was held in a grand hall on the top floor of the building. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, the rain having given way to clear skies. Rows of chairs were filled with military personnel, government officials, and the families of the honored veterans. At the front of the room, a small group of elderly individuals sat together, the surviving members of Special Operations Group Delta. Isolde took her place among them, exchanging quiet greetings with people she had not seen in decades. Their reunion was subdued but profound, the shared experiences between them creating a bond that transcended the long years of separation and silence. "Never thought we would live to see this day," said a white-haired man seated next to Isolde. His nameplate read, Commander Malcolm Reed. "Some of us did not," Isolde replied softly. "But they are remembered," said another veteran, a woman named Elaine Foster. "Finally remembered officially." A hush fell over the room as the president entered, accompanied by high-ranking military officers. The ceremony began with formality and precision. Each survivor of the Special Operations Unit called forward individually to receive their long-overdue recognition. When Isolde's name was called, she walked to the podium with the same straight-backed posture she had maintained throughout her ordeal at the checkpoint. The president spoke briefly about her service record, the parts that could now be disclosed, before pinning the Distinguished Service Cross to the uniform jacket she now wore. Captain Thorne's actions during Operation Dismantle saved the lives of 37 hostages and prevented an international incident that could have escalated tensions during a particularly volatile period of the Cold War, the president announced. Her linguistic skills and quick thinking under extreme pressure exemplify the highest traditions of military service. Isolde accepted the medal with a formal salute, her face betraying little emotion. But those who knew her well could see the subtle shift in her expression, not pride for herself, but remembrance of those who had served alongside her and never returned. After the ceremony, a reception was held in an adjoining room. Military personnel and government officials mingled with the honored veterans, many seeking to hear stories that had been classified for decades. Isolde stood slightly apart, a glass of water in her hand, observing the proceedings with quiet detachment. General Crane approached her. "How does it feel after all these years?" "Strange," Isolde admitted, "to speak openly of things we were ordered never to mention, to be recognized for actions we were told never happened." "Times change," General Crane replied. "The world is ready for these truths now." "Is it?" Isolde's question was genuine. Or is it simply that those who wanted the secrets kept are no longer alive to protest? Before General Crane could respond, they were interrupted by Officer Adira Ellis, the young security officer from the checkpoint. She approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable in the formal setting. "Captain Thorne," she said, nervously straightening her uniform. "I hope I am not intruding. I was invited to attend by General Crane." Isolde nodded in acknowledgement. "Officer Ellis, you are not intruding. I wanted to apologize properly for what happened earlier, for how you were treated." "You were not responsible," Isolde replied. "No, but I did not speak up either. I watched it happen," Adira admitted. "And I have been thinking about what you said, about service happening where no one is watching." Isolde studied the young woman for a moment before asking, "Why did you become a security officer, Officer Ellis?" The question seemed to surprise Adira. "To protect people, to serve in some capacity." "And do you feel you are achieving that purpose?" Adira hesitated. "Not always. Sometimes it feels like we forget why we are there. It becomes about authority rather than service." Isolde nodded, a subtle approval in her expression. A common hazard in any position of power, no matter how small. "How did you handle it?" Adira asked suddenly. "The disrespect, I mean. Not just today, but throughout your career. It must have been so much worse back then, being a woman in that role." "With dignity," Isolde replied simply. "Not because I always felt dignified, but because maintaining dignity deprives others of the power to diminish you." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "People will judge what they can see, Officer Ellis. Your job is to know what is invisible, your own worth." Adira absorbed these words, clearly turning them over in her mind. "Thank you," she said finally, "for your service and for your wisdom." As Adira walked away, General Crane turned to Isolde. "You made quite an impression on her." "Perhaps," Isolde acknowledged, "though I suspect